Welcome back to Arsenal Pass, Hayden here, and we're now a week removed from Everfest release. And I don't know about you, but I've been pretty excited to get in the workshop, or the metaphorical workshop, and look at what Classic Constructed might look like with the impact of Everfest, what decks I want to play, and what some of the key cards are coming out of the set. If you've been listening to the Arsenal Pass podcast for the past 2 weeks, and heading into this next week, we're going to be doing part 3. Myself and Brendan have been breaking down each of the classes in Flesh and Blood right now, and how Everfest is impacting them in Classic Constructed. But one thing I want to take a look at today is what are some of the decks that maybe you should look at playing heading into the ProQuest season as we're approaching, week 1 of ProQuest now within 7 days. What are some of the decks that are sitting at the top, maybe tier 1 looking like? So I'm going to be going over 5 decks today. I'm going to be looking at 3 top tiers, or things that I think should probably be looking to be tier 1 as we head into week 1. I've also got another that I think is around that sort of tier 1.5, a real contender, and then a bit of a roughie, something that I think is in the right meta, could be one of the decks that could really take out, a handful of ProQuests given the right circumstances. So let's get in and talk about the heroes that I'm thinking about for Everfest Classic Constructed. Now, there's 5 heroes, as I said, that I'm going to talk about in this video, and I think 3 of these are sitting or looking to be the tier 1 sort of heroes as we approach the start of this Everfest new meta. Now, for me, those heroes are Bravo, star of the show, the new Bravo. We've seen how powerful that can be. If you haven't checked out the Channel Fireball video with Tarek Patel and Rob Seigel playing that deck into Briar, I recommend you go and check it out to see just the raw power that hero has. For me as well, Viserai. I think Viserai is in a really good position, got some new tools. Prism's got a lot of new tools and would also be one of those decks. Those are the 3 that I think are really competing for tier 1 in this format. The other 2 decks that I'm going to share, and we're going to go through some deck lists and talk about these decks and why I think they could be good choices for week 1 of the ProQuest. But that's Dash for me. I think Dash is really in and around that tier 1 zone, and I'll explain more about why I think that is as we get into it. And then I'm going to share a Rhinar deck list with you. I can't go, a Classic Constructed video. I've been tinkering, I've been playing around. Rhinar is still something that I think, it's my roughie, but it's something that I think could come from, be a bit of a dark horse in this format, given the right meta circumstances. So let's get into it. And first of all, I'm going to talk about Dash. So as I said in my intro, I think that Dash is more sitting around this tier 1.5, tier 2, but I actually think is probably a really strong and solid pick for week 1 of the ProQuest season. Now, there's a couple of reasons for that. One, the list I'm going to share with you, I think is pretty tuned from the last meta and is a bit of a carry across maybe from the end of Monarch, start of Tales of Aria meta, just with some of the new tools and a little bit tuned for the meta that we're going to walk into. The other reason as well is that I think, with the plan with induction chambers and plasma purifiers, you have quite a good sort of base of a control deck, or at least a deck that can grind out games into things like Bravo and Old Time. On the flip side of that, you also have access to this really aggressive sort of shell with high octane and the sort of Tome of Fiendal package to play into things, like other aggro decks, perhaps like Briar, or even Prism, of course, which is going to be big in this meta. Plus, you have some 6 attacks in there, but we'll see that in the list. So I think that Dash is a deck that you can definitely look at and is going to be something that could be a good early pick, and to be honest, could be good through this meta. So let's take a look at the deck list that I have for you, the sort of week 1 ProQuest Dash. So here it is. This is what my week 1 Dash list is looking like. As I say, it's pretty much a bit of a holdover from the previous formats with a few tweaks here and there. So if we look through our reds first, you can see that we have, things like Command and Conquer as a sort of heavy hitting 6 attack, which is also great into Prism. We have a few defense reactions in the form of Fate Foreseen, Sink Belows, and the Unmovables, which I think are important at the moment, playing into Guardians. And then the rest are our sort of, for the most part, Mechanologist cards that are really aggressive. We have the High Octanes in there, and then we have the Chambers in the form of, the Induction Chamber, and then the Plasma Purifier. As we head into our yellows, you'll see Disruption Sphere. Now, this is the card that I think we really gain from Everfest, and I think is going to really help us into the Viserai meta in particular, if we think that deck is going to be sort of tier 1. So this is the reason I think that this list can be very good, or this deck can be very good week 1 of ProQuest season. I think your Prism matchup is pretty reasonable, and in fact, Brendan and I just recorded a game earlier today where we did play Prism into Dash, and I feel perfectly fine being on the Dash side of that matchup. As you'll see, very close game. That's going to go up next week on the channel. No spoilers. And then the Viserai matchup, as I say, I think it can be close. I think Disruption Sphere, helps a lot in that matchup. And then if we talk about Bravo Star of the Show, I think you have this ability to be really aggressive into them as well as using your defense reactions in the form of a movable to maybe take care of those big turns that they might have, while just boosting your way through the rest of the deck and keeping it pretty mechanologist heavy. You'll see that I've gone with the one piece of Nulrune. I think if you're expecting Wizard with this sort of list, if you're running it in your meta, then I'd probably play the cap, the Viseatronic, and maybe just find something to cut to fit that in. That's my week 1 dash list, and I think, to be honest, this is one of the decks that these are the 5 decks that I would consider taking to a Pro Quest in Season 1, but this dash list is definitely up there for me. Could use a little bit of tweaking, I think, as I tune and test with it, but I think this is a good base to start from to attack what we think could reasonably be the week 1 meta with Everfest as we head into Pro Quest. If you've been tuning into anything Arsenal Pass over the last few weeks through the Everfest preview season, through the first 2 weeks of the Everfest podcast that we've done as we go through each and every class, myself and Brendan have both talked about Prism quite a lot. And it's a hero that's getting a lot of upgrades, I think, with this set. And it's probably the one that might have the target on its back heading into Pro Quest, sort of week 1, week 2. But in saying that, Prism is very strong. I think we're going to see a lot of iterations of Prism as we go. But the list I'm going to share with you for sort of week 1 Pro Quest, I think is, reasonably streamlined. It integrates some of the new powerful cards that we get from Everfest in the form of Fractal Replication and Miraging Metamorph, which are 2 very, very strong cards, as well as some of the zero-cost auras like Haze Bending and Shimmers of Silver. So there's a really strong base to a Prism deck there, and it looks like it can compete against a lot of the format, especially with, when you consider things like the changes and errata to Briar and the recent bannings. So let's take a look at this Prism list. Now, I certainly cannot claim to be an expert when it comes to Prism, so I've shamelessly stolen this list from what Brendan is playing next week in our gameplay, or in fact, by the time you watch this video, the gameplay might be up between Dash and Prism. But as I say, Prism is looking to be probably the deck to beat in week 1, if not at least a tier 1 sort of hero as we head through this early metagame. And we get a lot of really important tools, especially in the form of Fractal Replication and Miraging Metamorph, which make it harder to defend against sort of Prism with those heralds. If I don't defend a herald, are they going to play the Fractal Replication? If they come with a Miraging Metamorph and I do pop it with a 6+ attack, are they going to have the 4-cost aura to flash in and get a copy of? So many things to think about. We also have Coalescence Mirage, which allows us to, sneak these 0-cost auras into play. And this list in particular is playing 6 of them, and I think, 6 of the best in the form of Shimmers of Silver and Haze Bending. But I think the other 2 as well, the other 6 that you could play are worth looking at. And I have seen lists that do run, all 12 of these 0-cost auras. This list as well, I think, takes a lot of inspiration from Nick Holdings that won New Zealand Nationals. And we do see, all of the traditional auras from Monarch in there as well, including all of the Arclight Sentinels. So there could be some wiggle room with this list in terms of what you might look like. Again, I don't claim to be an expert on Prism, and I haven't played much Prism since the release. I've left that to some of the others now in our sort of testing team who are giving me that information. But I think this is a good place to start from, and quite a tight sort of list that you can then maybe take along and tweak and tune to the way that you maybe want to play it, and maybe look at some of the other tools that you have at your disposal. Now, for me personally, Viserai is a hero that I think was very strong in the previous meta, one of the best heroes in the previous meta, in fact, in my eyes, and I think has only gotten better with the upgrades from Everfest. Now, traditionally, you've had a weak matchup into Prism, and, of course, other heroes and other classes have gotten cards, so it's not all, step-ups here. I think there's a lot happening in this meta, but I do think Viserai early on will probably be a tier 1 contender. And I think the cards with Revel and Runeblood Incantation, Swarming Gloomveil in particular, those 3 I think really give some options to change the way you play. Traditionally, I played at Nationals a more sort of semi-OTK into a tempo sort of strategy, a bit of a hybrid strategy. I think now you can play a lot more aggressively with Viserai heading into this format, and the deck list that I'm going to show you right now does just that. Post my Australian Nationals, which happened just a few weeks ago, we headed straight into the Everfest preview season, and I definitely was not disappointed as someone who had been playing Viserai for the sort of, the weeks leading up to the event and then eventually playing Viserai at my national championships. We got a few tools, and as you'll see in this deck list, I am trying a few of these tools. Now, I will say this list, I think there is some tweaking to be done, but I think this is a good structure, and what you'll see is this list is definitely more aggressive than if you checked out my Viserai deck profile. And I recommend if you want to know more about Viserai and sort of some of the interactions that I think are important, go and check that out. But we get a few new tools and really important tools in the form of Swarming Gloomveil, Runeblood Incantation, and the Revelin Runeblood. And these help us be more aggressive. So this list really leans into being a more aggressive based Viserai list, which I think is important. Probably in the early stages of the meta, I think it gives you better game into Prism. I think these Bravo Star of the Show lists that are really aggressive, I think you want to be aggressive into. I don't think you can sit back on as much because of the ability for them to consistently activate that ability. So this is what I would probably be looking at, or something similar. As I say, we've got cards like Consuming Volition to be aggressive. We've got more Mordred Tides in there. And then we have a few defense reactions still hanging around in there. On the equipment side, we get the Vexing Quill Hand as well. And I'm looking at 3 Arcane Barrier in this list currently. I'm a little bit worried about Wizard, and I don't think it's a fantastic matchup with this list, although because it is more aggressive, I think that gets better, and you could potentially cut that Norin if you don't want it, if there's another card you want to fit in here somewhere. But overall, I think this is a good starting point for looking at Viserai, and I think that taking it a little bit more aggressive is potentially the way to go as we head into the early Everfest format. Flesh and Blood's newest adult hero, Bravo Star of the Show, I think is really set to shake things up. Now, I thought it might take a while for us as a collective community and a player base to work out how to consistently utilize this new Star of the Show ability. Doesn't seem to be the case. We're already seeing some deck lists out there early, and the one I'm going to share with you in particular, which is kind of the one that's being talked about a lot, has this way to consistently sort of trigger and activate Bravo's hero ability with the use of the 3 pulses, the Pulse of Eisenloft, of Volthaven, and of Candlehold, as well as utilizing really powerful attacks like Oakenfold and Crippling Crush to combo with that ability and just be really aggressive. Now, I think one downside of the new Bravo Star of the Show sort of decks that we're seeing at the moment is that you kind of have to fill your deck with some subpar cards, some cards that you might not want to play, Defend 2s, things that if you draw all together aren't very effective. But the overall sort of power level of the Bravo Star of the Show sort of lists that we're seeing early on seem quite powerful, so let's take a look at it. Now, while some of the lists that I'm going to show you in this video are my own lists, including the Viserai and Dash lists, I cannot claim that this Bravo list is mine whatsoever. This actually comes from the video that Tarek Patel and Rob Seigel did showing off this new Bravo, and I believe that list that Rob plays actually comes from a bloke by the name of Matthew. So all credit to him for this list, but this is a list that looks to activate that Bravo hero ability very regularly, quite actively, and quite consistently. As you look at the sort of, if you go across to the blues here on our right hand side, you can see just how many elemental blues are in this list. Basically all of them in terms of what we're playing here. So a really good split between lightning, ice, and earth, and allowing you to more regularly hit that Bravo ability. And some of these actually are just good as well, while some of them are maybe a little bit weaker. And I think that's some of the things that we probably want to look at if you're, maybe wanting to pick up Bravo Star of the Show as we head forward in the Everfest meta. But a really fantastic starting point is this list, I think, one that can consistently trigger that ability. Now, the key cards really outside of that are the 3 pulses, as I did talk about before. And one of the cool sort of game sort of patterns you can follow is that you can actually hold these pulses in your hand and just turn after turn, fuse that ability, fuse Oakenfolds. I've played this a few times. Pulse of Eisenloft, I really want to keep that in my hand so that I can continually fuse to that, reveal to that Bravo ability, or fuse with something like Oakenfold. Other than that, yeah, just a really solid list. You've got a few sort of equipment options there, and then those really heavy hitters in the form of Oakenfold and Crippling Crush, and then some reds that kind of do a job for you. Sometimes you're not going to draw those, but you need reds to play that Bravo ability on and then come in with weapons. So this is the list that I think you want to start with. I think after this, what we might see happen is cards like Earthlore Bounty, as I said before, get looked at, and maybe a bit more of an intermediary list that maybe doesn't trigger Bravo quite as often, but still really frequently, but has some of these other sort of newer cards or sort of game plans around it, which is something that I'll definitely be looking at. All right, last but certainly not least for me, of course, very near and dear to my heart, if you watch anything Arsenal Pass and anything that I talk about, Rhinar Reckless Rampage. Now, I want to caveat this. I think that taking Rhinar into week 1 of the Pro Quest, you really need to understand what your metagame is going to look like. I think if you're expecting to see a lot of Prism and slower Guardian decks and some other mid-range decks, then I think Rhinar is actually a very solid pick. And the list that I'm going to show you here is catered and tailored towards that. This is a Rhinar list that is focused on sort of combating Prism and these slower matchups in particular. Now, if you're expecting more aggressive sort of metas, then Rhinar probably isn't a week 1 ProQuest list for you. But without further discussion, let's jump in and look at this Rhinar list that I have for you. Here's the Rhinar list that I would look at for early Everfest meta. And as I say again, this is a list in particular that is really tuned to looking at that Prism matchup and these sort of old time, Bravo, these this Guardian, maybe grindier matchups. Now, I think with the way that people are taking Bravo Star of the Show in the early part of this meta, I think that can be okay for you. I think as it slows down, which I potentially think it would, that gets better. But as I say, if you're expecting a super aggressive meta, maybe you think Katsu's going to show up in yours, you're expecting Briar to still be out there, then this might not be the list that you want to take. But this is one that is tuned towards what I think we might see heavily prevalent in the early meta game. I think this would change for me probably in 2 weeks' time very easily. So some of the cards that I think are specific to the kind of game plan that I think you want to enact against things like Prism, well, we've got the 2 Pulpings and the 3 red Wild Rides plus some blue Wild Rides in there. And then when we look at, that allows us to basically go wide, hit their shields, and then hit their auras on the back end and just take over that game. And we get to play 46 attacks in the main deck when we do that in that matchup. So we're able to pretty consistently hit it, as well as, of course, we do have the Scabskin Leathers and the Sand Sketch plan. When we look at that Guardian matchup, we've got the 3 unmovables, which I think are really key. We can cycle those for late game if we need. And we're just looking to set up turns, Blood Rush Bellows turns, and we have Remembrance for those grindy matchups as well. Guardian, actually one of my favorite matchups to play with Rhinar. So, as I say, that's the list I would look at for, week 1, week 2, and a specific meta. Really interested to see what happens to Rhinar. As I said, and if you heard our preview show or our review show of Everfest, I don't think Brute has gotten much or the right tools, unfortunately. But Swing Big is actually one of the best cards that you can play on the end of a Blood Rush Bellows turn, and is really efficient to do so, and a real big upgrade on Pack Hunt, which I think is fantastic. So there you have it. 5 lists, 5 heroes that I think are shaping up to be options for week 1 of ProQuest season. Now, from a personal standpoint, I will be playing one of these 5 heroes. In fact, I'm probably going to play a number of these heroes over the ProQuest season, as I'm, fortunate enough that I'm going to be able to go to a few, and all of these heroes I think could be contenders. As I say, I think there's those 3 really tier 1, or shaping up to be tier 1, especially in my view, for the early sort of ProQuest meta in the form of Bravo, Star of the Show, Viserai, and Prism. And then I think Dash is hanging in and around that area. And of course, I think, as always, I think that Rhinar is close and can be a meta call. And from a personal standpoint, that's a hero that I think that I would play in the meta call situation. There's others as well. I think Katsu could be in there in the right meta as well. I think you just have to find the right list. So those are the 5 heroes I'm looking at. I hope these lists have helped you, if not give you somewhere to, something to play, at least giving you somewhere to start and giving you an idea of some of the cards and the strategies that I think are going to be really viable and really strong as we head into this early Everfest meta. Good luck to all of you playing in ProQuest in this coming week, and enjoy and have fun.